Wave of Mutilation is a 2011 novella, 100 pages listed on Goodreads, by Douglas Lain, published in 2011. Set in 2001, sort of on that cusp of the Gore-Bush election for all you youngins out there. That was the election where had the hanging chads, and it was down to the wire, and basically instead of the voters deciding, it seemed to get fought out in the courts of exactly who was going to become president in the United States. In the context of that, the main character Christian Nicholson and his wife Samantha are head back to Tennessee because his father has died to attend the funeral. While at his father, who was like part of an atomic collider program and had a grandfather who helped build the atomic bomb. They visit a history museum all about the atomic energy and all that. One of the exhibits phones rings, and it's his father saying that reality. What's the thing? What's the quote? That my father had warned me that the unreality was leaking out of the world, and he said that what we needed was a new fantasy. Without it, some sense of wonder, some detail that could fill in all the gaps and make us believe, all that would remain would be this kind of flat reality. And indeed, so this book is very much a, as it's talking about, it opens in a hotel, which at motel and by the poolside where his wife is swimming naked, and he's sitting by the poolside listening to like a tape deck. Very kind of, they're from Portland, so you know, of course they've got a tape deck because they're hipsters. The best kind of hipsters though, because they're from Portland. You know, them saying that a motel is basically a architectural fiction of a home. And there's very much the sense of like architectural theory. There's a fellow, Louis Kahn is mentioned quite a bit, who's a fellow who apparently he did kind of monumental architecture, very kind of brutal. One of the quotes here is like, you know, was this a postmodern gesture or brutalist intervention? Brutalist architects wanted to reveal the structure underneath the usual facade in order to compel people to recognize their own complicity in the structure's presence. Most people resented buildings made with this sort of demand. And, you know, postmodern architecture artfully recreates the trivial and contingent in order to expose how there are no structures. So it's like, you know, are there no structures, or are there just basically you're surrounded by structures? You're in a world where, like, do you actually have a free choice, politically wise? Like, you know, did it make a difference whether you voted for Bush or you voted for Gore? Because in the end, there seemed to be a structure underneath that it was taken out of the hands of the voters, and it was decided that way. And that was very much a pivot point in however well in pivot point in history, or just a pivot point. And suddenly people went from a Clinton 90s kind of way of thinking about stuff to click, we get to Bush, and I mean 9/11 comes next and all the other stuff. So it's a book that's very fractured in its own time. It's time. We flit from the hotel to like, you know, going to this museum, but back to like Portland, and then after Portland. And indeed, the character himself is aware that he's in this story, that he starts getting like, well, okay, am I doing my flashback within a flashback, or is this a flashback after I've had all my flashbacks? There's very much this impetus to reveal all the kind of the hidden structures in this book. You know, it's key that Christian is an architect in this book. He comes back and he finds that his workplace, Montgomery Park, which is an actual building in Portland, has been completely filled with cement. And then he suddenly realizes, oh, I was actually a part of the project to make it filled with concrete. Like it's sort of like it was, we're filling up the space with concrete to kind of draw attention to the space. But for some reason, people who wanted to actually work and live in this space wouldn't like it so much. And there's a bit later where there's like the family home where his mother still lives, and he's decided to construct an industrial shed around it, which seems to be very much a literal representation of what a lot of novelists would do, or, just people in general. It's like, you have your parents' lives, and you construct your own narrative around their lives, and you slot them into it. But it's like, they're like, but this is my life and my story. It's like, nope, you're getting slotted into my story here because you're my parent. And suddenly you've been demoted from being the main character in your own story to being like, just, yep, you're inside of my structure. And actually at one point in the book, Samantha, his wife, suddenly takes over. And, indeed, they actually notes that, something happened so that the story didn't belong to her husband anymore. And we get this very bravura thing of her realizing that she's hollow and kind of clicks herself open, takes off her wig, opens herself up, and she's been kind of disgorging eggs. And she makes a discovery about herself, there, which is very interesting and very odd. It's a very interesting and very odd book. We are kind of just pulling stuff apart. I'm just trying to, without the fiction of character or story, without the emptiness that is at the center of all accidents, all the burning coals or imposed styles, without an architect, there is really nothing at all, nothing but dumb reality. It's this, sense of we make sense of our reality. And I think that's on a novelist point of thing, or even a creative nonfiction writer, people who supposedly deal in strict facts are actually constructing narratives. Everything is a narrative. All, just our senses are taking in all this sensory data, and we're making sense of it, whether we like it or not, because I've got to make sense to be able to walk out of this room, to figure out what that door is, to what my sensory stuff is, to figure all this stuff out to exist in the world. So you can't, like, there's, in some ways, you can't escape meaning. There is a thing of the worry there of like getting a flattened reality though. And, the worry there of, oh my God, I've got to kind of create something there. So it's an interesting story. Have I said that many times now? It's interesting that the father is such an absence in this story. And I mean, he comes in to say that there's been a hole punctured in the fabric of reality. And in some ways you get the sense of he's that hole, he's that absence, that stuff is leaching out. And I mean, I think Douglas Lain doesn't seem to be somebody who's interested in getting into like the psychology of that kind of constructed reality, or he's more interested in the overarching kind of structural stuff versus the individual. But there's in some ways that I sort of wish there was more of an emotional connection to. You get the sense of the father calling his son on the phone from beyond the grave. If that had more of a kind of I guess everything is flattened, and I feel like the novel doesn't work through that flattenness to get out the other side. At the end, it's all letters and words. I would like to put two shout outs. One, Wave of Mutilation, the Pixies, which indeed quotes in the story that Christian knows the name of the story that he's in, and they talk about driving off into the sea, which is, there's this thing of, I think the song is kind of written as sort of this idea of suicides in Japan, of people, of families just driving into the sea to commit suicide, businessmen. And, kind of that structure, that horrible structure and escape and stuff like that. And this wave of mutilation that's going to come across everybody because of this flattening of reality and of, not being able to have, I don't know if it's not being able to have free choice or not being able to give yourself the fiction of having free choice. So there's that shout out. And there's also that he does the best thing possible for someone who is, a simple fellow like me, which is he brings up Grover. And the story that, and it's just the lovely book that Grover has, is stars in, which is there's a monster at the end of the book. And Grover goes through the entire story going, oh my God, there's going to be a monster at the end of the book. That's what the title says. And he fights against it, and he tries to get the reader not to turn the pages. And it's just like this lovely thing of, here's a character that is aware that they're in a story and is trying to fight against the structure of the, don't turn the page, but of course you're going to turn the page because that's the point of it. You don't really like, oh, Grover doesn't want you to turn the page, and you shut it. So I think, if anything, I have to go pick up Grover, because I think Grover sounds like that must be baby's first postmodernist, structuralist reader. I think I probably should start off at that level and then come back yet again to this book for another reading. So yeah, a very intellectually stimulating book. I don't know if it caught me on an emotional level. I don't know if it was actually aiming for an emotional gut punch. Yeah, it's that surrealistic, intellectual, philosophical kind of kick, which is awesome to have. It's awesome to have when you're getting kicked around by all those other books that are fully pulling the veil of fictitious illusion across you and trying to get you to buy into their made up characters and all those letters and words and paragraphs on the page and make you feel, which I of course love, but it's nice to have a book that questions that as well. So yeah, that's my review of A Wave of Mutilation, or my reaction to, or my ramblings to. More videos later.